is obviously running for president again. He has sort of made this a key part of his 2024 presidential campaign. He seized on this civil fraud trial. And he's sort of,
there's James, the AG.
And this is Letitia James, and this is sort of an extension of the campaign trail for him.
Michael Popak, Legal AF, the day your outside appraisers come and testify against you in a fraud case, that their information was fraudulently misused by Donald Trump and Donald Trump's financial control people, that's a terrible day for you in a civil fraud case. And that's what happened to Donald Trump today. Despite all of the circus came to town and Donald Trump standing out in front of the courthouse and pissing off the court clerk because he kept coming back late to court. He was only there for half a day, but, you know, maximum attention, maximum oxygen sucking by Donald Trump. But what was really going on, once again, the methodical presentation of evidence and witnesses by the Office of the Attorney General. It's just chopping wood and stacking it every minute, every hour, every day in the case for the next 100 days. And none of this foolishness and acting out and antics by Donald Trump in the hallway. We'll show a little clip of that in a minute, especially on the day he got gagged by a federal judge because he's constantly using violent rhetoric to attack everybody related to the criminal justice system. Whatever was going on outside was not what was going on inside, and that's what matters. None of it bothers Judge Engoron. Judge Engoron holds Donald Trump, his business empire, whatever size it is, in the palm of his hand. And if he decides that there is persistent fraud on top of persistent fraud and fines for the New York Attorney General on all 6 counts, he will take away these trophy properties that Donald Trump loves so much. He will destroy the company that Donald Trump built. What he said today was the greatest real estate company in the world, owning the greatest real estate assets in the world with lots of cash. All that cash is going to be taken over and brought over and given to the people of the state of New York for fraud. All of those assets will be liquidated, and Donald Trump will be left, I don't know, wearing a barrel and suspenders at the rate he's going. Today was what I like to refer to as appraiser day. We've had insider, current employees of Donald Trump testifying against him and saying that he was involved and led the fraud, the financial fraud. We've had outsider accountants and auditors do the same thing. We've had outside bankers say the same thing from Deutsche Bank. Today, up on the stand, Cushman Wakefield, a renowned international global real estate conglomerate that does a lot of things from brokerage to capital markets, raising money for the transaction of real estate, and appraisals. The problem is the appraiser who took the stand today, who worked closely with the Trump organization, Mr. Larson, Doug Larson, I don't know if he was feigning that he was shocked and surprised, or he was shocked and surprised by a document, a piece of evidence that was put in front of him by the Office of Attorney General, which I'm going to show right here, which was the controller for the Trump organization, the one who's responsible for the financial controls, who reports to Alan Weisselberg, the chief financial officer, had claimed that Doug Larson and Cushman Wakefield was the author, was the expert who provided certain data within financial statements that were shown to banks when that was a lie. Let me repeat that. Today on the stand, the outside auditor admitted under oath that the Trump organization, led by Donald Trump, lied to its lenders and its bankers on its financial statements by claiming that made-up and cooked numbers about the value of assets were the work and the result of Doug Larson, Cushman, Wakefield, when it was not. It was just cooked. So now the worm has turned, another layer of fraud. It's not just about making up your own numbers. In order to really sell the fraud, right, really sell the conceit to the banks, you have to make them think that there is a real independent third-party company that is validating those numbers, right? You have to fake the stamp of approval. And you say things like, oh, sure, Cushman Wakefield supports these numbers. These appraised numbers, these appraisal numbers and value, that's Cushman Wakefield's number. And that would give relief and comfort to a banker who was making a big loan. And in underwriting, they would say, in the underwriting for the bank that needs to evaluate and do due diligence about the loan, they would say, well, what's the appraisal in there? Well, they have an appraisal from Cushman Wakefield. Oh, Cushman Wakefield. We know Cushman Wakefield. Where do I sign to approve the loan? That was a fraud on top of a fraud. It's the fraud that's necessary to perpetrate the fraud. Because you can't do it yourself. You got to also fake the doctor's note. You got to fake the note from the accountant, from the appraiser, from the bank. And then this is the tangled web that's been woven by Donald Trump and his financial people. It was blown sky high and a mile wide today by Doug Bender in his testimony. You know, Cushman Wakefield has its own problems. They were found in contempt by Judge Engoron about 6 or 8 months ago for their failure to timely turn over documents about their client after the judge already determined that there was no privilege that they could assert, and they were still late in turning over all their documents, all their files without any holdback to the Office of Attorney General. And they got fined $10,000 a day by Judge Engoron for doing so. And then they quit the representation because they got their own reputation to worry about. So they fired the client. Just like Mazars, the outside accounting firm for a dozen years, fired Donald Trump and the Trump Organization. And at the same time went a step further when they quit noisily, more noisily than Cushman Wakefield, and said, and everything we just did and all those financial statements we audited were based on information that we received from the Trump Organization. We cannot rely on them. So you can't rely on our audited financials for the last 12. Years. Cushman Wakefield, a little more political, a little more diplomatic, worried that Donald Trump could still be a real estate developer in the future and they may want to have a relationship with him, foot dragged about turning over documents. But today was the day. A year later, Doug Larson, come on up and let me show you a document that your own client used externally, not just internally, to show bankers with your name on it. Was that right? And he said, point blank under oath, that was inappropriate and inaccurate. An appraisal by me or Cushman Wakefield should have been ordered, and it wasn't. And we're not just talking about, as Alina Habba and the other lawyers said in the courtroom or outside the courtroom, de minimis amounts of money here. We're talking about big swings between the actual value of something and the value claimed by Donald Trump. For example, and I know this property because I work and live in New York, Nike Town, which went belly up, which is a block or so from Trump Tower on Fifth Avenue. It's a big retail, it's a nice retail. I think it's on 57th Street near off of Fifth Avenue. And they valued it on the Trump internal books based on a series of assumptions that are incorrect, that even their own outside appraiser said was wrong, valued it at $287 million. $287 million. Doug Larson was shown all the variables and assumptions that were made, and he immediately said, this is wrong. This is not how you do an appraisal value for Nike Town, because they're using comparative properties that aren't comparable, right? You got to use retail space in and around, let's say, the Midtown New York block with a certain vacancy rate and a square footage and a certain what we call capitalization rate or cap rate. And of course, they manipulated all those numbers to spit out a number they wanted. They reverse engineered it. We want this to be about a $300 million property. What do we need to do? Okay, on the Excel spreadsheet, change this number, change that multiple, change that factor. Look, $300 million for a property that's probably worth half that. And that was Doug Larson's point, which is very powerful when it's coming out of the mouth of the longtime appraiser for the Trump organization, who's already upset and chagrined that his name got used fraudulently on financial statements and on valuation when he didn't do the valuation. They take that kind of stuff very seriously, appraisers. When you put their name on appraisals they didn't do, they get really, really upset. And that's what we saw today in the courthouse at 60 Center Street in New York. Another example is 40 Wall Street. You've heard a lot about 40 Wall Street. I used to have an office right near it. It's right near the stock exchange, New York Stock Exchange, for those that know that area. It's a big, hulking building. It's got a lot of vacancies. It's always had a lot of vacancies, especially during COVID. It had huge retail vacancies at the bottom. You know, these commercial condominiums in the building was about half empty. I got friends that have a law practice inside there. And so when you calculate the value, you have to take into account things like vacancy rate, right? And, you know, you're missing revenue from the bottom because there's no, you know, the pharmacy went out 5 years ago, and the Whole Foods that was supposed to come in 3 years ago never came in until recently. And those are factors that go into the appraised value. Many of you may not know this, but I'm about to embark on an amazing life-altering event. Trust and Will has simplified the process for, or if everybody's sitting down, we'll get these numbers right. He had it on his books for $500 million. $540 million. That's a big difference, right? I didn't major in math. I don't have an MBA, but I can tell you that 220 million and 540 million are two completely different universes of numbers. But when you have to think about the motive here, and that's where the New York Attorney General comes into her case, because she has to prove intent, not motive, but intent to commit a fraud. And the intent is there was a giant hole on the balance sheet for Donald Trump that he didn't like. It was like glaring at him, right? This big red hole created by the fact that Forbes magazine had discovered that he was lying for years about the size of his Manhattan penthouse, and that it was only worth 1/3 of the value that was always listed on his balance sheet. And he hated that. So he had to find a way to fill the gap. Since he couldn't acquire other assets, you got to make your existing assets worth more. And how do you do that? You manipulate the numbers. You cook the books. It's been going on for years. It's been going on for so long that there's a phrase for it I just used: cooking the books. That's all Donald Trump did. It wasn't a sophisticated... I don't want anybody to think that this was, as Donald Trump likes to say, a beautiful fraud, a great fraud, the best and mostest fraud ever. This was a garden variety, penny ante fraud of cooking the books that's done by your, the local deli on the corner and the dry cleaner that only takes cash every day. Change the numbers, 2 sets of books. That's all this is. And then when they needed to really have some sort of gold star attached to it or validation, lie about it and say that people like Cushman Wakefield validated the numbers when they didn't, and the appraisals. So with that kind of testimony, and the testimony also of another insider, Donna Kidder, who's an assistant controller reporting to Jeff McConney, the controller, the one who already said that Alan Weisselberg and Donald Trump ordered him to change the numbers to improve Donald Trump's financial picture without any basis. Donna Kidder, who Donald Trump in his deposition said he didn't even know who she was, because smartly the Attorney General during her deposition ran by all the names they were going to use at trial a year later, or 6 months later, and said, do you know this guy? Do you know this person? Do you know this person? And Donald Trump said, I really don't know them. So yesterday, Peter Berney, the assistant vice president, who's soon to be out of a job, testified against the Trump organization about Alan Weisselberg ordering him at Trump's direction to increase balance sheet numbers without any basis. Cooking the books.
Cyber self-defense classes.
Karim is checking his email, and there is a spam. Spam! Come on! No more spam.
He said he didn't know who that person was in his deposition, even though he's worked for the company for 9 years. Donna Kidder's worked for the company for like 18 years, and he said he didn't know who she was. But she knew who he was, and that's the more important aspect of her testimony. He said that Alan Weisselberg told her to make favorable assumptions about various properties in order to geek up the price, right? Gin up the price. He told her to assume vacancy rates, like the building wasn't vacant, that there weren't any vacancies in a rental building, or there were more sales and a sellout of a property like a condominium that needed to be sold. Let's say they had 30 units left to be sold. He said, assume they're all sold. Let's say they had a vacancy rate of 14%. He said, lower that to 2%. And they use different capitalization rates, right? The cost of money invested in the building to operate the building. If you change the cap rate and you totally disregard the true vacancies in the building and you increase the amount of sales over what really exists, you're going to get a higher number. Shocking. And that's what Donna Kidder testified that she was ordered to do by Alan Weisselberg for Donald Trump. Did I say at the beginning of this hot take this was a terrible day for Donald Trump on the stand in the Attorney General's civil fraud case? Because it was. On top of yesterday's terrible day, on top of the day before's terrible day, and so on for the last 2 weeks. Don't misinterpret the arrival of Donald Trump. It was a terrible day for him. I think he thought Michael Cohen was going to be on the stand, and that's going to have to await Michael's medical condition clearing up. He was also in town because he had to give a 2-hour deposition in the FBI employees who were fired during their role in the Mueller investigation because they were also Democrats and they said some stupid things in text messages. He had to give a deposition for that as well. So he had to leave. But not before he pissed off the entire court staff and the court clerk who got into the hallway and said 2 minutes and looked right at Donald Trump to get him back into the courtroom. Very little cross-examination going on of any of these witnesses by the Trump defense lawyers, which is shocking. I'm a 32-year trial lawyer in courtrooms just like this one, in cases sort of like these. I've never seen it. Yes, you've got a judge instead of a jury, but this judge knows this case inside and out. And if you're thinking that, well, I'm not going to cross-examine this witness that's really, really bad for me, who works for us or used to work for us, that was called in the Attorney General's case in chief. Instead, I'm going to wait until our case in defense, and then I'll call him again. 4 months from now, 2 months from now. Good luck. That bell has already been rung with this judge, who every day is forming his opinion, literally, to write against you. You have to do it in real time at the time in order to counteract any bad effect. If he bloodied you in his testimony, or she did, you got to do something about it. Get up, cross-examine, do the best you can to cauterize the wound. Don't just say no questions, which is what they've been doing. So Patrick Burney, the vice president, assistant vice president in the accounting department, who just completely was almost a technical knockout for Donald Trump.